and there's a good work-life balance. So I can give you for an example. My wife was expecting one of our kids, and she was going to be delivering like middle of the patrol that I was getting ready to go on. And the patrol was going to be 3 months. Well, she was doing like 6 weeks. And so the captain, he said, well, how about we just leave you here and you can work over here on this other ship, TAD, temporarily assigned duty, for them, helping them with whatever they need until your wife has the baby. And then a couple weeks after, you just meet us in port somewhere, wherever is closest to where we are. And I was like, okay. And I mean, it was great. And I told people that, and maybe the Navy does that. Maybe there's people in the Navy that they've done that for, but I tell that to people in the Navy, they're like, they did what?
Welcome to How I Embraced the Suck, a podcast where you get to hear from veterans what life in the military is really like. I am your host, Walt, and before we start, you should know that I do not censor the show in any way. You have been warned. I don't really have any fancy opening or anything.
No words of wisdom you're going to lay on me? Okay. So
definitely no words of wisdom. I just say today we've got Russ, former Coast Guard member.
Yeah.
So, and that's it.
That's pretty accurate.
Then it's on you.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
I'm all about as little effort as possible on my part. So
yeah.
So there you go.
Good deal. Yeah. So Coast Guard, the forgotten service in a lot of senses, and it's kind of funny because we always have a lot of good jokes about us. If you're under 6 feet, people ask, "How did you get in? Did you get a waiver?" Because if the boat sinks, you can walk to shore because the Coast Guard doesn't go out of sight of land, which is that is a big myth. The funny thing is that the Navy usually deploys a battle group, and they send a Coast Guard cutter with them to provide security, which I always found is kind of ironic. You're sending out the big bad Navy, and you got the little Coast Guard cutter that's running security patrol around the battle group. Like
interdiction security or
just security, yeah. For any vessels that may be coming in toward the battle group, they go out and they intercept them.
Sure.
Yeah. So overseas, to the Gulf, wherever.
Right.
That's pretty funny. So
I would imagine it'd be something like search and rescue support or like a carrier group launch support, like downed air crew or something.
Right.
But
yeah. So we do a lot of support to the Navy, with the Navy, a lot of joint operations with the Navy, even sometimes down, say, like South Pacific or Caribbean, doing drug ops. The Navy will be down there patrolling, and they'll have a Coast Guard leadette, so a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment, that if they come upon a vessel that they want to board, the leadette will take over the Navy ship as far as like command,
right? Because
the Navy is considered an armed, military force, whereas the Coast Guard is more seen as a security force and humanitarian in nature. That they'll turn it over to the Coast Guard boarding team to control the vessel, so that they fall under different regulations.
Right. Yeah. Coast Guard isn't part of the Department of Defense anymore.
No,
they're
Department of Homeland Security.
Right. So they're seen as more like of a law enforcement operation than
a military enforcement, going to war, even though we have been involved as a Coast Guard in every war since the Civil War.
Right.
And back then it was the Revenue Cutter Service, is what it was first known as.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and it fell under the Department of Treasury, which was Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it predates the Secret Service.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
but the same original department.
Yeah, and then you had the U.S. Life Saving Service, and the Coast Guard merged, or the Revenue Cutter Service merged with that the U.S. Life Saving Service, which manages lighthouses and a lot of buoys and markers along the coast.
Right.
And that formed the United States Coast Guard.
Huh, interesting. And now most people in their minds think of the Coast Guard as the life-saving branch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it is in a sense, but, the Coast Guard is more of a humanitarian service than it is a military service, even though we fall under the military in the same pay structures, the same rank structures of Navy. You have E1 to E10, from seaman to master chief. Mm-hmm. In the Navy, it's same as the Coast Guard, same thing with their officers. O1 is an ensign, O10 is the commandant or the admiral.
Okay, sure.
Same pay scale, same benefits, BAH, basic allowance for housing. A lot of people don't realize that, but they think, the Coast Guard's more like the National Guard, and it's not.
Right.
So we get the same active duty credit as they would get, and
you earn that deployment ribbon.
You do. You have a the same type of retirement opportunity as the other branches, whereas 20 years active service in the Coast Guard, you're eligible for retirement.
Okay.
And the same thing as far as punishment, the Coast Guard falls under the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Oh, even now that it's part of the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it has.
Sure.
I mean, it has, and that's the thing a lot of people don't understand. So they list the branches of the military, and usually you hear the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines.
Right.
And if they're really...
You're like, we're our own department. We're better than the Marines.
I don't know about that. The Marines are good. I like the Marines. The Marines are, that they're a part of the Department of the Navy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
but everybody thinks of them as their own branch.
Yeah, they're the men's department.
Yes, yep.
So anyway, there's all kinds of jokes that go back and forth between the branches, and the Navy and the Coast Guard are always swinging.
Right.
So, and the Coast Guard USCG stands for Uncle Sam's Confused Group.
Right.
Anyway, it's all good.
Oh,
so, again, back to what I was saying, the Coast Guard, first and foremost, is humanitarian. So, search and rescue is our primary mission, right?
Sure.
Saving lives and property at sea. So, if we're on a operation for, let's say, a drug bust, and we get a call that there's a boat 15 miles, 20 nautical miles away, we're going to leave the boarding team on scene conducting that boarding of that drug boat, and we're going to save lives.
Sure.
First and foremost. So, Coast Guard is, search and rescue is the primary mission, and then you have law enforcement, you have environmental protection, you have fisheries enforcement, a lot of other hats that the Coast Guard wears.
Sure.
And then, again, we, in time of war, we fall under the Department of the Navy.
Right. Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Huh.
So a lot of the coxswains in World War II were coasties.
Right. Okay. Remind me what that role is exactly.
Boat drivers.
Oh, okay.
Small boat drivers.
Gotcha. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Oh, like landing craft and whatnot. Okay. Interesting.
Yep.
Huh. That makes sense. So, for example, like Normandy or something on D-Day, were the landing craft entirely crewed by coasties?
No.
Or just the
there would be some that would augment and help man.
Gotcha.
To help the Navy just because of numbers.
Okay, sure. Huh, interesting.
Yep.
So your involvement with the Coast Guard, I guess before we get too much into it, were you ever directly involved in the search and rescue, like assigned search and rescue function, or did you do other?
Yeah, so I was a radioman.
Okay.
So in the search and rescue, they would call Mayday. A vessel would call Mayday over the radio. I would be,
Gotcha.
The shipboard or the land side of that Mayday call.
Right.
That would be my position. So,
okay.
A boat would call, Mayday, Mayday, Coast Guard, we're going under or we're taking on water or whatever. And then I would come on and say, vessel hailing Coast Guard, this is, United States Coast Guard, wherever I was stationed.
Sure.
Please state your position and the nature of distress. And that's number one thing we always wanted to get was their position. If we didn't get anything else, at least we could get a boat, aircraft on scene to search that area and look for, survivors and debris.
Sure.
So that was kind of my role, and that's what I did initially.
So what got you into the Coast Guard?
It's interesting. I grew up
aside from not wanting to be in the men's apartment.
Yeah, I did like the Marines. It was interesting or tempting, but the I had other branches calling me after high school, and that had talked to me during high school, and I wasn't interested in any of them. And my mom just said, "Have you ever checked out the Coast Guard?" And we had a guy who was kind of a grandfather to me growing up. My grandfathers, both of them died before I was 5, just from old age. And this guy was a captain, retired from the Coast Guard, and I used to refer to him as Captain Callis. He was kind of like my grandfather. He lived in Virginia Beach. And my mom said, "Have you ever thought about the Coast Guard? Captain Callis always spoke highly of it." And I was like, "No." She goes, "Why don't you, check them out?"
Sure.
And so I went down to the recruiting office in Atlanta and talked to a recruiter and kind of liked what he was telling me. I was big into competitive swimming, and so I liked the rescue swimmer program, which was what I was initially going in for. And like what he told me, took the test, scored fairly well, told me I qualified, and then basically told me it'd be 3-year wait to be able to go to that school. And I thought, well, I'm enlisting for 4. I'm going to wait 3 years, and I'm going to get to do a job for 1. What do I do in the meantime? He says, well, you'll do whatever the Coast Guard needs you to. And I'm like, and he said, and then once you graduate school, you'll obligate an additional 2 years. And so I'm going, well, I'm enlisting for 4, so what you're telling me is I'm going to wind up doing 6?
Right.
He's like, yep. And I'm like, I don't know that that's really what I want to do. And he goes, well, you can pick a different rate and go to school quicker. And then, so I looked at Radyman because of telecommunications, and I was in Atlanta, late 80s, and AT&T was really big and coming up. So I thought, okay, I'll get some telecommunications experience and, whatever, and I'll go back to Atlanta and get a job with AT&T. Mm-hmm. And after 3 years of doing what I did, doing boardings and other things on a ship out of California for 3 years, I was like, this is pretty fun. So I re-enlisted for another 4, and then went to the East Coast and was at Air Station Elizabeth City doing search and rescue for the mid-Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, okay. So there were you
I was
Air Station. Were you plane borne or?
Nope, I was on the ground in the comm center.
Gotcha. Okay.
So handling search and rescues, helping to coordinate them, getting the aircraft up and going, giving them information as they're either on their way en route to the scene or on their way back from the scene. I'm transferring information to the ambulance or medical department to let them know what they had coming.
Sure. Huh. What how many of the aircraft that flew out of there were helicopters as opposed to fixed wing?
There was four H-60s, so Jayhawks, and then there was 4 or 5 C-130s.
Okay. Yeah, because you mentioned aircraft flying back with people on them. I'm like, that'd be hard for an airplane to pick someone up at sea.
Yeah, no.
They don't have any flying boats nowadays.
Yeah, so it's the H-60s that are going out with a rescue swimmer and air crew.
Okay. Huh. That's that'd be interesting.
Yeah, so then I did that for 5 years and was asked to be an instructor at the Radyman School, and went and was an instructor for 5 years and loved that, just getting to share my experience and knowledge and understanding of, communication things with new young coasties.
Yeah.
It was good.
Huh. How so in your instructing, how much liberty did you have? Was it a very fixed regimen of or a syllabus, I mean?
There's a curriculum. So there's a structured curriculum.
Sure.
And modules or courses that they would complete in a 16-week period.
Okay.
And if they were going to a ship, then they would have an additional 2 weeks of what we call a C school, or the letter C. So like an advanced school where they would get shipboard communications training.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
they'd learn more about satellite communications and long range HF communication type of things.
Okay.
And crypto, stuff like that.
Huh. Okay. Huh. Yeah. I guess in a bureaucracy, there's no way to escape some sort of curriculum.
No.
And there'd be little value without it, for sure.
Yeah. It needed structure. That's for sure.
Yeah. Huh. So what? And then at that point, after you were the instructor, Did you get out after that, or?
Nope. No, I made chief, and then I transferred and went back to a ship. And
Okay.
So then I was on a ship for another 3 years and basically led all the guys in the communications department.
Sure.
And did the search and rescue, did boardings for drug enforcement, did fisheries enforcement up in Alaska. A lot of all-pats, a lot of all-pats as we call them, Alaskan patrols. So going up in the Bering Sea, actually doing search and rescue platforms for the deadliest catch. If you've seen the crab fishing
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah,
show.
I've not seen
Okay,
it, but
yeah.
I'm
So,
vaguely familiar with it.
Matter of fact, the first year they did it, I want to say it was 2003, and they pulled in Dutch Harbor, and we were in Dutch Harbor just fueling up, and we're at the one hotel restaurant in Dutch Harbor that had really good food, and all
Right.
these guys walk in with these camera bags and discovery badges on their bags, and we're like, who are these guys?
What did we miss?
And they're like, they're here to film some show, and we didn't have any idea what it was. And then a year later or so, we found out that it was the deadliest catch, and there we are,
Right.
providing a search and rescue platform in the event one of the ships caught fire, took on water, somebody fell overboard,
Right.
something
right.
like that.
Which you were doing anyway. I mean,
Right, we're up there doing that anyway.
Yeah, there was no function of
as well as we're patrolling the maritime boundary line between us and Russia.
Oh, sure. Yeah, which is super close there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So
what
make
is
sure
it
that-
closest? 20 miles or so? 30 miles
From
between us and Alaska and Russia? Okay.
You got me. I don't know.
okay.
I mean, I
It's
should know
close.
that. It's kind of sad, but I should know that. But I know that we ran that line, the maritime boundary line between us and Russia, to make sure that our fishing fleet wasn't on Russian side and the Russian fishing
sure.
fleet wasn't on our side.
Sure. Huh. What did the Russians have a counterpart to the Coast Guard?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
separate
Yeah.
from their Navy, or is
Yeah.
it integral with their Navy?
Uh,
Do you know?
I'm not sure, honestly. I know the Japanese have a separate Coast Guard, and that's because I went over there in part of their celebration of their 125th year. The
Okay.
Japanese Maritime Safety Agency, so it's the JMSA,
Okay.
and
Okay.
they're the Coast Guard for Japan, and I think Russia has a Coast Guard. Maybe they just have the Russian Navy.
Okay. But did you ever, in those patrols, encounter them doing the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would see them. Yeah.
If they pass you on the east,
Yep.
to the east of you, you're like, someone's in the wrong
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah, we didn't wave. We didn't, pull the ship's whistle. And didn't do passing honors like you
Right.
normally would with naval vessels.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, no,
okay.
no.
Interesting.
No, we didn't.
So was there kind of like an aggressive feel?
It was
Or
tension.
just-
wasn't
okay,
wasn't
or tension, I
aggression,
should say,
but it
sure.
was more. Yeah, it was tense.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. That makes sense. Like you're saying, it's the Coast Guard, and I'm sure their Navy, their function also
Yeah.
is so close. Excuse me. So close to the military that even in times of peace, there's going to be. It's not as if a fishing vessel saw another fishing vessel.
Right.
Yeah. So there'd definitely be some.
Right.
Huh.
And
What-
even among the fishing vessels, there was tension. Like the Russian boats would try and ride the line, and we'd hear about
Oh.
one of the Russian boats trying to intimidate the American
Sure.
fishing boats and telling them that they can't fish there, and they're perfectly within their bounds on the right side of the line.
Right.
And then-
Right.
So anyway, it's just kind of funny.
Oh. Huh. So what? As I'm trying to think how to frame the question. How just comparing a ship posting to a shore posting to a school posting. Or I don't know what the Coast
okay.
Guard calls it.
Right, shore duty versus
Duty. Okay.
shipboard
sure.
duty.
Yeah.
Um,
What?
It's
what
different. So the challenges there, and I mean, shore command and training, in an instructor role, is similar in that you're going home every night, and you're basically,
Sure.
at the air station you're on a watch. You're on like two watches on, so 2 12-hour shifts. So you're on 12, off 12.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're on 12, off 48. So 2 on, 2 off, 2 on, 3 off.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
You're on a watch rotation to where you're standing duty, as we call it, for 12 hours. and that could be from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, or 7 at night to 7 in the morning.
Sure.
So you just kind of get a weird rhythm.
Right.
Whereas if you're in an instructor position, it's Monday through Friday, basically school hours. So you're there 6:30 until 1600.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you've got basically your weekends off. You got duty outside of that, depending on what your duty section is and where you're standing duty outside of your instructor role. For me, I was 5 years as a volunteer on the fire department. So I carried a pager and would respond to any kind of calls that came in. We had a fire department on base.
Got the base. Okay,
and they would do mutual aid with the surrounding community as well. So we would do we'd do medical aids and respond to farms where, farmers had a stroke or injured themselves somehow.
Sure.
Or we even did wildland fire, because it was in California, and then as well as we did motor vehicle accidents, did structure fires, things like that. So you would respond if your pager went off and you were available. If you're on the podium teaching, obviously, unless you got somebody to stand in for you,
right,
you weren't going.
Okay.
But otherwise you're home Monday through Friday.
Right.
In the evenings, and the same thing with being on a ship. When you're not deployed, you're basically working, a daytime routine, Monday through Friday, and then you're off on the weekends. But once you deploy, then you're working. You could be working the whole time.
Sure.
Not the whole time. You're going to be working. Depends on really the tempo of operations, what you're in. Like if we're transiting, say, to the South Pacific to go do, patrols for drug ops, then obviously transiting isn't as busy as if we actually get a vessel or go fast or, another support vessel that we've found.
Sure.
Then all of a sudden, the work begins, and it could be days.
Huh.
So it's different. But shore duty is more conducive with family life.
Sure.
Whereas being on a ship, you're going to be deployed and you're going to be gone. The Coast Guard's nice in that it doesn't go as long as the Navy. Longest deployment I think I did was about 121 days.
Okay.
To where we were away from home port.
Sure.
So what's that, 4 months almost?
Mm-hmm.
Navy's typically 6 months at the least.
Yeah.
Maybe
and
9, maybe 12.
Too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So.
Huh.
But now, it's a little less now with the Coast Guard. I think they're doing pretty much like 60 days, but maybe they're going longer than that.
What was the?
We could probably edit that part out.
I didn't hear that. I was zoned out. As normal. What was the camaraderie is not the right term, but just like relationships within the service,
Yeah. So,
especially between like officers and enlisted. Was it more relaxed than other services?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So we did a lot of work, or I should say I did a lot of work with the Navy at times, just going down to the South Pacific, and we would typically go through San Diego, and we'd do a lot of training down there with the Navy's training group. And it's definitely different in the Coast Guard. I mean, there's the respect for officers from enlisted, but it's not as I don't know if tense would be the right word, or I don't know what the right word is, but the Navy, it's definitely more formal.
Sure. Yeah.
And the Coast Guard, it's not as formal, but it's still, military bearing is a big thing. So it's different. It's and it's even different going from, say, like a surface officer, so officers that are on ships as opposed to officers that are pilots, and even even different from officers that came from the academy and officers that came through OCS, which is Officer Candidate School, which typically is civilians that come in with a degree and they apply for a program.
Mm-hmm.
And they become an officer, whereas you get the guys that come from the academy, they're a little more tightly wound, and have a little more of a chip.
Sure. Yeah.
And kind of maybe the ring knocker. mentality of like, I've got the class ring, so does he. You don't.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I've got some pretty good stories.
We're the ones that impart dignity to the service, so respect what we're here for.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a difference to that, and even within the Coast Guard, and I tell guys this in the other services, and a lot of them, some of them have seen it. Even the guys that I know, some of the guys that I worked with in the Navy, really saw it and liked it, just the way that the Coast Guard takes care of their people. Which I would say the Coast Guard's very family oriented, and there's a good work-life balance. So I can give you for an example. My wife was expecting one of our kids, and she was going to be delivering like middle of the patrol that I was getting ready to go on.
Oh, sure.
And the patrol was going to be 3 months. Well, she was doing like 6 weeks, and so the captain, he said, "Well, how about we just leave you here, and you can work over here on this other ship." TAD, temporarily assigned duty, for them, helping them with whatever they need.
Sure.
Until your wife has a baby, and then a couple weeks after, you just meet us in port somewhere, wherever is closest to where we are.
Sure. Huh.
And I was like, okay. And I mean, it was great. And I told people that, and maybe the Navy does that. Maybe there's people in the Navy that they've done that for, but I tell that to people in the Navy, they're like, they did what?
Yeah, unbelievable.
I'm like, yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of, just the Coast Guard's, more family oriented, and I would say even it's more like a firehouse. If you've ever been a part of a firehouse or been in that environment, those guys are close, especially when they're on the scene and they're, fighting a fire or responding to a vehicle accident or something like that. They're very, they work well together.
Sure.
And they get things done. And then afterwards, they know how to have fun, whether it's, shooting pool at the firehouse or playing b-ball out back or in the kitchen. Everybody's chipping in to cook a meal because, we're all starving.
Right.
And it's just kind of that, close kind of firehouse mentality. And the Coast Guard's more like that, especially because the units have a tendency to be smaller. So if you're at, say, a small boat station, so close to where we live up at the sub base is a small boat station.
Okay.
And there's, I'll say 20 guys, 20 guys and gals that work out of that station. I could be wrong in that number, but it's not too far off.
Sure.
And you think, okay, they're stationed there for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and they get to know each other, and they know their families, they know their kids, and it's very, close camaraderie.
Sure.
Where, I don't know that there's that same. I mean, I'm sure there is in some instances in other services, but for the most part, that's kind of the way the Coast Guard's, laid out. Is there's a lot of small stations, especially if you look around the country along the coast, from New England down to Florida, up into the Gulf, around Texas, up the California coast to here. I mean, there's Coast Guard stations all along, and then you go up into Alaska and Hawaii, and all those Coast Guard stations, they're 25 people.
Right. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I've noticed that with the smaller the unit in general, whether it be special forces, for example, or like you're saying, just a small station, there does seem to be a lot more just camaraderie, genuine camaraderie, and a little relaxing, not relaxing of standards, but just more,
they get comfortable with each other.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
if
what
you
it
forgot
is.
to shave
It's
that
close
morning,
knit.
It's not going to affect your career.
Yeah. No, it's close knit. It's more closely knit, and they take care of one another.
Sure. And then also you have in the Coast Guard, you have the addition of, like you're saying, the main purpose, the mission is to save lives. So I think that also kind of, when you're giving, when you're helping others, when you're giving of yourself, it helps you to not see yourself as so important. So it's easier to have camaraderie and acceptance of the small group.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was a recruiter in charge for 5 years, so I've worn a lot of hats.
Yeah.
I taught leadership and management for 2, recruiter in charge for 5, but it's interesting when I had recruiters that worked for me, I would tell them, like, the people that are really a good fit are people that have a mindset of volunteerism, right? They're available to help. And that's kind of what we look for in the Coast Guard is people that, want to serve other people and not just be served themselves.
Sure.
Right? And so we would look for people that were either volunteering already with their local fire department. A lot of times, people that have been the Scouts even. Boy Scouts was a good fit because they're usually community service oriented.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so those type of people are a good fit. And I've kind of been that way since growing up as a kid, and that's kind of how my dad, raised me was, if you see somebody who needs help and you can help them, help them.
Sure.
And it's one of the things I tell my kids, the best ability that you can have is availability. Like, be available to help somebody. If they need help, help them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's kind of, I would say that's kind of the Coast Guard mentality as a whole. And people that don't have that, they usually wash out.
Right. Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, so speaking of washing out, how obviously you haven't experienced the other boot camps, but in your experience, what's the difference between Coast Guard boot camp and the other services?
Yeah, so as a recruiter in charge, those are things that they actually, show you in school when you're going through recruiter school. It's just the difference. And I want to say it was early 2000s at the Coast Guard headquarters wanted to revamp recruit training, basic training, and they went and kind of evaluated the other services, the other branches, and they really tried to tailor their new basic training after the Marine Corps' 12-week boot camp. And so it's very mental. I mean, they get in your head as soon as you pull in. You got a Smokey the Bear on the bus with the hat low and, covering the eyes, kind of like you look at the Marines.
Sure.
They get that drill instructor cap, and they come on barking orders, and you're like, uh-oh, what did I do? And
Mom!
So they kind of tailored it after that with the physical side of it as well as the mental. And then the Coast Guard is very, very much in the memory. They want you to memorize a whole lot of history, a whole lot of ranks and structures and orders. Your 10, basically the 10 commandments, but the 10 general orders. There's a lot of memorization, a lot of testing, a lot of book testing. And so it's tough, and it's 8 weeks. There's a video that's online if anybody ever wants to look at it. It's just 8 weeks. Is what it's called.
Okay.
And it'll show you Coast Guard basic training, and it is they roll you into Cape May under the cover of darkness on a bus, and you pull up in front of this building, and the lights come on, and you see these footprints on the sidewalk, and guy gets on the bus and starts telling you what you're gonna do, and when I say this, you say, "Sir, yes, sir. Is that correct? Yes, sir. What did I say? Sir, yes, sir."
Right.
Then he's already in your face, and he goes, "You got 15 seconds to get off this bus, and you've already wasted 10 of them. Move, 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 move." And people are crawling and climbing under and over everybody to try and get out there and get their bag and get on their spot. And it's a long night. And then you roll in there, and that's the first night. And I think we went to bed. I think they let us go to bed at about 2.
Wow.
And they got us up either at 4 or 5 that first night. And so it's the first day. It's just, they're hitting you.
Yeah.
And they're getting you with sleep deprivation and, all the mental side of it of, man, these people, what in the world, where did I wind up? So, but, and it's all got a point to it. They're going to tear you down and break everybody out of this, individuality mold. And you're going to, start to conform and be part of the team. And it's kind of funny because even in the leadership management that I used to teach, there's kind of a philosophy, and I'm not sure who came up with the process, but there's the forming, and it's pretty much in any team. You can look at it in athletics as well. There's the forming of a team, right? You find the people that are going to be on that team. So there's the forming. There's the storming. So you get all the players and you put them together. And so the Coast Guard boot camp, they kind of do that and kind of figure out in the first few days who's going to be the leader, who's going to be a follower, who's going to be a wallflower, all these different positions, and so you let them kind of storm among themselves. So there's the forming of the team, the players, and then there's the storming to kind of cement your position, and then there's the norming, so they start to figure out who's what's your role, what's my role, and they start forming,
become
storming,
accustomed to the
forming, storming, norming, and then performing. So then you're a unit and you're working together, right? Because you figured out what your role is. I know what my role is, and it just it's kind of that process. And yet they try to break you down from the get-go to where you feel like, man, I am nothing. I'm nothing but a dirtbag. I'm a cotton-headed ninny-muggins. And then they bring you up to where, week 8, you're super coasty with a big old CG on your chest and a cape flying off your back, leaving the front gate after graduation.
Right.
Ready to go rescue the world.
Sure. What was it like to go from there to your first posting, or your first
first station, first duty.
There you go.
Cross country, 3,000 miles away from home. Graduated high school, went to boot camp.
Right.
Then here I am, all on my own. Going across country and to California, and was like, okay, this is interesting. And, met some friends, and it was good. But it was it was definitely a growing experience.
Sure.
It was good. It was good for helping me, to mature as I needed to.
So coming into your first duty as a brand new out of boot camp, like was there a little were you immediately part of the team?
No.
Or was okay.
No. There's the reminder, that you're the new, boot.
Right, because like you're saying, you come out after 8 weeks. You're like, I'm going to save the world, and then the old guys are like, okay, buddy.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. No, there's people that be like, okay, and I'm kind of high strung as it is. You know that.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty energetic, and they're like, hey, settle down, man. You got to throttle back. I'm like, okay.
Right. Right.
So, whatever.
Oh, that's funny.
Speaking of Coast Guard, sounds like an H-60 flying over.
Yeah. What's the I forget the numbers for is it the Dolphin?
Dolphin's the H-65.
65. Okay.
Yeah. Great helicopter. I've flown on both of them.
Yeah.
Dolphin's pretty. It's like the little sports car of the Coast Guard.
Right.
Okay. Jayhawk's a workhorse. But,
sure.
I love flying. They're both great aircraft.
Yeah.
And then the Coast Guard also has the Falcon, which is HU-25. So it's a Lear jet.
Sure. Okay.
Does long range law enforcement typically.
Okay. Huh. Okay. So and then they've got the 130s you mentioned.
Yep. C-130s.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, I got to fly one of those. I got to fly one of those Falcons out of San Diego for 2 hours.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a young, I'd been in, I think at that point, 3 years.
How'd that happen?
I went over to the air station there in San Diego, right across from the airport, and they taxi across the highway from the air station to the San Diego airport to take off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
So they use the San Diego airport's runway. But I went over there and was at the comm center talking to some people, and the pilot came in and said, I was talking about how I like flying. He goes, you want to go flying? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, all right, be here tomorrow, and we'll take you out. And so I show up the next day, and they give me a flight suit, and basically said we're going to go do a search and rescue, or we're going to go do a law enforcement patrol. And I'm like, okay. He goes, we'll be gone probably about 4 hours. I'm like, sounds good. Let's go. And we walked out, got in the airplane, taxied across the runway or across the highway,
right,
over to the San Diego airport, took off, got airborne and leveled off, and about maybe an hour into the flight, not even that, the commander in charge of the aircraft looked back, and I was just sitting back behind them, the two pilots, and he goes, hey, you ever wanted to fly? And I'm like, absolutely. And I'd actually started taking doing my private pilot's license.
Oh, yeah.
Back before we had our first kid.
Right.
But then we had our first kid, and that changed the
right. Yeah.
focus and finances. And anyway, so he said, "Oh," he looked at the co-pilot and he goes, "Hop out and let him in." And you could see that co-pilot wasn't real happy about it. And I was like, okay. And I sat down and he gave me a quick lesson, like, here's your altitude, here's your attitude, here's the degree of roll and bank and all this. And so he let me fly, and he just told me, he's like, all right, we're going to ID some vessels. And he's like, drop down to 500 feet on this boat so the guys in the back can get the numbers off of it. And then we pass over the sailboat, and he's like, did you guys get that? They're like, no, sir, we're going to need another pass. And he goes, okay, I want you to drop down to 200 feet. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah. Didn't get to fly any of the others. Didn't get to fly the helicopters, but I wouldn't mind.
Sure, yeah.
I got to fly in them, but not actually fly them.
Not stick them, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Took one, did a H-60 training flight. We went through the canyons of West Virginia, flying down in the valley in the creek bottom.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then we popped up over a hill. A buddy of mine was the aircraft commander, and we popped up over a hill, and he's like, "There's this real good burger place right here." And so we pulled in because he had to get gas for the helicopter, and so we pulled into the airfield there, and they fueled up. While they fueled up, we got a burger. I'm like, this is good. All for training.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just imagining him knowing of a really good place and just landing in the parking lot or something.
No, not quite. It wasn't far. We didn't have to go far, but
sure.
It was, it was pretty neat.
That'd be classic.
Yeah.
That's cool. What was, contrast, or maybe not contrast, but your experience with your recruiter originally compared to being a recruiter. A lot of people experience something different than what they think that what their recruiter told them.
Okay, right.
And then, so,
yep.
was that the case? And then also, how did your experience being recruited and joining up, although you sought them out, so there is that, but how did that affect your time as a recruiter? Or maybe
it's good. It's
direct
good.
it.
It was somewhat similar, and it was part of what drew me to the Coast Guard was that I had the other recruiters from other services calling me and hassling me.
Sure.
They'd call my mom. I'd come home. My mom would be like, "Hey, so and so called from the Army, or so and so called from the Navy." I'm like, "Okay,
Right.
But the Coast Guard never called me. Like I had to chase them down.
Sure.
And that kind of appealed to me because I'm the youngest of 4 boys. I love a challenge. I'm not like easily intimidated, and I don't mind having to work for things.
Sure.
So it kind of intrigued me, and it was that same type of thing. Even though, for me, I was more certain to have my recruiters follow up with people, and to help manage their expectations of when they might get to join.
Sure.
That where I didn't get that, right? So I had to chase my recruiter down to get set up to test. I had to chase him down to get set up to go physical.
Right.
Then I had to set him up. I had to call him to set up an appointment to come in to talk about, what I could do and where.
Sure.
He was a good recruiter. He was a second class. I think his last name was 1989. It's a long time ago. But that process was similar in that we didn't hound people. Like, we weren't going to chase you, and this is what I would tell people coming into the office when I was recruiter in charge and had my recruiters is, we're not going to hold your hand. Like, we want people that are motivated, self-starters, and follow through.
Sure.
So if you're serious about this, okay, we will help you to get where you want to go.
Sure.
But you have to do the work. I'm not going to, hold your hand. I'm not going to come knock on your door and remind you or pick you up to take you.
Right, exactly.
Right? You're going to be responsible, and if you're not, well, you're not coming in. And the reality is the Coast Guard can do that. And I used to tell people, I said the Marines like to say they're the few and the proud.
Right.
I like to say we're the best of the best. The reality is Coast Guard typically is looking for 4,500 people a year.
Oh, I see.
Nationwide.
Sure.
To recruit.
Sure.
Compare that to the Navy.
That's 3 big high schools.
Compare that to the Navy.
Yeah.
Who's looking for 90,000.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm sorry, not 90,000. No, the Navy's looking for 45,000. The Army's looking for 90,000.
Okay, gotcha.
So the Army, they'll take, they're
heartbeat.
looking for everybody.
Yeah, they're modifying your scores.
The Coast Guard, I don't know about that, but
Maybe
the Coast Guard's not, we're
Sure.
not tripping over people to get you in the door.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's different. And then as far as what the recruiter told me and what I experienced as far as boot camp or even the Coast Guard, there wasn't a whole lot told to me from my recruiter as to what the experience was going to be. And that's part of the reason that the Coast Guard has their recruiting video now, which is just 8 weeks. And that when I was in recruiting, that was a requirement. Like, that was one of the last things that you were to do before you were shipping to boot camp. Was you were going to sit down
Sure.
and you were going to watch the 15-minute video so that you knew what you were getting into.
Right.
And you don't get there, which was a problem. They would get people that would show up at boot camp and they'd have that, Marine drill instructor moment.
Right.
And they'd be like, I didn't join the Marines. And they're like, no, you joined the military, but you joined the Coast Guard.
Sure.
And we're going to set you straight.
Sure.
And they're like, this isn't what I signed up for. Well, now
you signed.
Now you can't claim that because you watch the video and you know this is what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
And the Coast Guard really isn't gonna strong arm anybody. So if you don't want to go and you decide last minute, like, I'm not going, okay, see ya. Don't come back.
Sure.
Don't come back. You're not coming back.
Yeah. Huh.
Whereas, like, the Army, and I know this for a fact because I was where my recruiting office was, I had the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. So the DOD recruiting was right there next to where we were.
Sure.
And I would have people come over and, tell me, well, the Army says that I can't do anything because I'm already depped in. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, the reality is that DEP is holding the Army's feet to the fire and basically holding them to what they've agreed to, and not the individual. So the DEP, which is the Delayed Enlistment Program or Delayed Entry Program, basically says that service will put you in boot camp. You will be in basic training within 12 months of signing that DEP contract.
Okay.
They can't hold it any longer than a year.
Gotcha.
So you will within a year go, most likely within the next couple months. You'll be off to boot camp. Mm-hmm. But they're obligated, not the individual, whereas the Army used to use it as you're obligated, and if you don't, then you could be imprisoned and possibly have to pay a fine.
Oh, sure.
And they would try to, scare kids, and I know it because I saw it.
Yeah.
And I used to, I'd have kids come talk to me, and I'd be like, no, that's not. Bring me your DD-4, which is a form from MEPS, and I would, basically show them, like, here. Read this right here. It basically holds the service. It holds them to the commitment. Sure. And not that, I don't think... I'm not a type of guy that says you just break your word. But
right.
Sometimes people have an epiphany or whatever, and they change their mind. Okay. And the Coast Guard's just like, all right, well, if that's what you've decided, best of luck to you.
Sure.
Don't come back when, whatever it is you're planning to do doesn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, though, because you're so small.
Yeah, so
your
we're
group
the smallest,
is already self-selecting.
Yeah. There's more police officers in the state of New York and the city than there is in the Coast Guard. Coast Guard has 42,000 members.
Oh, wow, okay.
The Navy, 340,000.
Right, yeah. Big difference.
Yeah. Army, over 500,000. And if you include the National Guard,
right, sure,
they're huge.
Sure.
So that's why they're looking for 90,000 a year. The Navy's looking for 45,000 a year, and it changes from year to year depending on attrition.
Sure.
And then the Coast Guard's typically, 4,500 a year nationwide.
Yeah.
So when you have 90, recruiting offices, that's, just over 45 recruiting, maybe even less than that. Yeah, just over 45 recruits per office.
Oh, right, per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
12
wow.
months.
In those numbers.
12 months.
Yeah. That's less than one a week.
That's why I say the best of the best.
Sure.
I mean, we're super selective.
Sure.
We have the highest required ASVAB score for any of the branches. We require, other certifications to really be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
You want to show that you've been a volunteer firefighter. You might have your firefighter 1. You might have your EMT. You maybe been a lifeguard somewhere and you have, CPR certification, first responder certification, things like that.
Sure.
We're looking for those type of things. And then we have a lot of people that come that have college.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of the people that are joining, they're scoring, they're doing good scores on the ASVAB. If you look at all the branches compared.
Right.
The Coast Guard usually has the best.
And that in and of itself is attractive to the type of people you want to have.
Yeah.
Like if it's hard to get in, the people that are coming after it and working hard are it's best for both.
Yep.
Or better for both, yeah. Huh.
Yep. And the Coast Guard has the least attrition. It means least people getting out after the first, percentage-wise. If you look at all the branches.
Sure.
So I'm telling you stats that I know from 2011. So
sure,
just to give the listener some
change,
context is, I've been out 10 years.
Sure. Yeah. Huh. That makes sense that people are more in it for the long haul than for the GI Bill or something. Yep.
Yeah. Even though people get it for that, and the reality is the Coast Guard has tuition assistance. So if you're active duty, they're going to pay for your college. Or 80% of your college while you're on active duty. So you can take courses. I took college when I was at the air station in North Carolina, Elizabeth City.
Sure.
So I went to college there during the day, and I would take classes that, worked with my schedule. Mm-hmm. So if I had duty or I was supposed to be on watch, I might have somebody that would come in and cover for me for 2 hours, and then I would, cover for them for 2 hours at some other point.
Sure, okay.
And the Coast Guard's paying for that with tuition assistance.
Right. Huh.
So that's not even using your GI Bill.
Right. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Huh. So, and this is I try to always ask this question, and I'm sure you have had direct experience with it. But if a kid was to come to you, not as a recruiter, but just as you, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about joining the military," what would your advice to them be?
I would have questions for him first.
Yeah, for sure.
My questions initially would be, what do you want to do? Mm-hmm. Do you know what you want to do? Is it you want to travel, or is it that you want to get some sort of training in a specific field? Because different branches will have different focuses, like Intel. Mm-hmm. Air Force is a great branch if you want to get in the Intel community. Mm-hmm. Coast Guard has intelligence specialists that they just stood up the intelligence specialist rating back in 2003. And so that's, another opportunity, but it really depends. I would have to ask them, like, what is your, what's your goal? What do you want to do? And then with that, I would also ask them, what's, are you looking at work-life balance? If you are, I would say either the Air Force or the Coast Guard. They take the best care of their people, and I had parents that would come in and ask me that. They'd come in and be like, "Chief, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah." If it was your kid, what would you tell them? I said, "Well, honestly," I would tell them either the Coast Guard or the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And the reality is the way they take care of their people. Mm. And I would give them the analogy of the Air Force, and this is pretty true. It's very true. You look at the Air Force, you go to any Air Force base, they're usually clean, they're usually organized, their buildings are in good condition, and, they have a good support network for their people there, whether it's their housing or their shopping or their recreation facilities. They have it because they put the money into it, right? So I used to tell people, I said the Air Force decides where they want to put a base. They go in, they build the housing, they build the recreation, they build the shopping and all the support facilities and all the hangars, and then they go back to Congress and then they build the golf course, the 18-hole golf course. And
of course.
You probably can't name on one hand 5 Air Force bases that don't have a golf course.
Right.
And there's one down the road. It has a golf course.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But they do all those things. They build the housing, the facilities, the golf course, and then they go back to Congress and they go, "Hey, we need money for runways."
That's so dirty.
Yeah, but I mean,
But
that's the reality. The Air Force takes good care of their people because they know what their people, need.
Sure. Yeah.
And not that everybody needs a golf course, but it's about the work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And the Coast Guard's very similar in that they've put a lot of money into supporting their people, whether it's the housing or where they're located and the facilities that they have around them, which the funny thing is a lot of the bases that the Coast Guard has used to be old Army bases that the Army vacated and the Coast Guard acquired.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't think of that because I don't associate Army with the ocean.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of them coastal.
Sure.
Coastal protection, wartime. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But so I would that would be my my advice to a young person.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I have sons, and so it's kind of what I've told them. I've told them the same thing, and the Air Force or the Coast Guard, for just the way that they take care of their people and the way that it operates.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I would probably say the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I've got a lot of friends in the Marines, and I think they're a good group of guys.
Nothing like a grunt for telling you what it is like.
Yep.
What it's really like.
Yep. So.
Yeah. The kind of related, but kind of a similar purpose as far as the listener interest. What's something that you now know about the Coast Guard that you wish you'd known before you joined? Maybe whether it would have redirected your approach or maybe the value that somebody who's planning on joining could get out of it. Maybe something they wouldn't necessarily know ahead of time. One fella I heard said that he was in the Air Force, and he wishes he had known earlier that within the first couple of years, your command is gonna set a bar that you're probably not gonna advance beyond. They're gonna assess you and be like, okay, this guy's gonna advance to 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get past that.
Right.
So it could be anything. It wouldn't need necessarily be just anything that you know now that you wish you'd known as a pre-boot camp kid.
Wow. That's a good question.
That is, and it's a big one too, and it's not original to me. I did not think of it. So.
No, that's a good question, and honestly, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
I mean, I can't, and that's kind of what, talking before we got on the air, just, it hasn't been bad. There hasn't been a whole lot of suck.
Sure.
For me, and, even when I go through base, I go on bases, and at the gate, the guard will usually look at my ID, and they'll say, oh, okay, thanks, Chief, you're good to go. Or they'll say, hey, thanks, Chief, appreciate your service, and my response is always, it's my privilege.
Sure.
It was my privilege. It wasn't my right. It wasn't my duty that I had to serve, right? Mm-hmm. There wasn't a draft. I volunteered, and it was my privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a privilege. Like, the Coast Guard's a great organization with a lot of great people, and I'm glad to have been a part of it. And, if they called me today, said, hey, we need you, I'm there.
Sure.
Yeah, so I like I said, there's not a whole lot of suck. I had a lot of great experiences, a lot of great opportunities, opportunity for, advancement, things like that were pretty much unlimited. The only thing that limited me on advancement was myself, and I kind of limited my advancement just because I was more family focused and wanted to be places which were conducive for my family, for my wife and kids. So
yeah.
Which it worked out well, worked out fine. But yeah, I can't really think of anything that like I know now. Like, that hindsight.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean it was a privilege. It was great.
Yeah.
And both my oldest boys, they want to join. My oldest son can't because he's got a disqualifier that's automatic, which is a hole in an eardrum unless he has that patched.
Sure.
That's a disqualifier. And
yeah.
So I know I know a lot of the disqualifiers. I can't say I know all of them, but it's just like unless you're going to have that patch, man, there's no, like, you're not going to get a waiver for that.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then my second oldest son's looking at joining. So, but, yeah, I can't really think anything that, that I wish I'd known.
Sure. Yeah. That's as good as answer as anything else could have been.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of good experiences, from air station with working with aircrafts to shipboard, and
sure,
doing patrols up in the Bering Sea, doing search and rescue platforms, doing patrols down in the South Pacific for drugs, and
yeah,
a lot of good things.
What I should ask, was there like a specific incident that just stands out as your best memory, or your most memorable moment, I guess, in the Coast Guard?
I don't know most memorable in, like, good. There's definitely one that probably had an impact on me, as big as anything that I experienced, which was the first search and rescue case that I worked on, and people died.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that was up in Alaska. And
sure.
Guys were on the rocks, small fishing boat, out fishing, 3 guys, and like a 35, 40-footer. And boat went dead in the water, and they got thrown on the rocks, and this was the middle of, like, January or February. And on Atka Island, which is on the Aleutian chain. And the captain's calling on the radio, and who answers? Me. I'm on watch, and I get the call, and you can just tell in the voice, frantic, hey, we're in trouble, we're taking on water, here's our position, and so I'm getting all the info, like, what's your position, what's the nature of distress, how many people on board, what's the description of your vessel, and we're on our way, and we're hammered down, rolling. And by the time we got there, the captain died. He was in the wheelhouse of the boat, didn't have his Gumby suit on. And up there at that time of year, 6 minutes in that water, and you're pretty much done. And the other 2 guys survived. They were able to get out of the boat, out of the wheelhouse, got onto the beach, and moved up into a cave. And so we sent a small boat once the boat got on scene, launched a small boat off the boat, and went and got them, and then had to recover the captain.
Sure.
And just, talking to that guy, listening to him, and the panic in his voice as you could hear the water hitting the mic, and he's keying up on me, and that was rough. And I was, 19. I think I was 19, and that was that was definitely memorable, and not in a good way. Just for a while, it was one of those things where even to tell the story, I would get kind of choked up. It's not. I didn't even know the guy. Just here I am talking to this guy, and I'm like, in my own mind, I'm like his lifeline.
Right.
And so to find out that he passed away, and we recovered his body and put it in the freezer, till we could get back to port and, turn it over to the coroner. Was just like, that was impactful. It really helped to cement the fact that we're doing something that matters.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I had somebody remind me, it's like, you're not the one to save them, like, and you can't save them all, because I was kind of taken, like, I let that guy down. Exactly. I should have been talking to him, telling him, put on your Gumby suit, which I don't know what he's, whether he's already donned it and he's on the radio or what, but anyway, as far as memorable like the flying that HU-25 Falcon out of San Diego, I've had I'm telling you, there's been a lot of good memories. First cocaine bust down in the South Pacific, that was memorable. It was huge. It was a record setter when we did it, in like 18 tons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was big. There's been a lot of good memories. A lot of good friends, a lot of people I still keep in contact with.
Yeah. So when you I didn't even think about that earlier, but when you were doing drug interdiction, were you, like you were talking about, sometimes you'd be on a Navy vessel, or were you on a dedicated Coast Guard vessel? Okay.
Yeah, I never was on a LEDET, so a law enforcement detachment. So we would have the detachments. They would go and deploy with the Navy.
Okay.
on their boat in the event that they, had a case that they were going to
Sure.
work or boat they were going to search. Then the Coast Guard could do that search, and they would again, because we fall under different.
Was that the case before the Coast Guard was part of the Department of Homeland Security?
Yes.
Even? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were
even though they were part of the Department of Defense, there was still like a technical distinction between the two.
The Coast Guard wasn't part of the Department of Defense.
Oh, it wasn't? Okay.
No. So
All right. Well,
the Coast Guard
I learned
was
something.
still the Coast Guard, and so they fall under different authority
Gotcha. Okay.
than the Navy would fall under.
Okay. So it's always been the case that
Yeah.
they have got.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different.
So prior
okay.
to Department of Homeland Security, we were Department of Transportation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then prior to Department of Transportation,
You're
we
just
were,
doing all the departments.
we were Department of Treasury to begin with.
Right.
And then once we moved over and joined with the U.S. Life-Saving Service,
Gotcha.
then that's when it fell under Department of Transportation.
Okay.
And then we stayed that until we moved to the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay. Sure. Huh. So what type of a vehicle or good grief. I'm not a sailor at all.
Vessel?
Vessel. Yeah, what type of vessel was a drug interdiction? Was it a large cutter?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it's what we called, it was a high-endurance cutter or a 378-foot cutter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically equivalent to like a Navy frigate.
Okay. Just a long duration at sea,
Mhm.
basically.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically 90 days.
Okay.
So a 378 is what we call them. Now they've got I forgot what they call them now. They've got all kinds of new ones.
All the
man.
numbers.
Yeah, not even the numbers, because a lot of the numbers stayed the same. They have the Weishi and the the Dorothy Stratton. Got these other, but they're modern new ships that have been commissioned just within like the last 10 years.
Okay.
And they're still rolling out new ones, but they've replaced those. They're phasing out the 378s
Mm-hmm.
and replacing them with these, which they're typically like, I want to say they're 400 feet,
Okay.
and they have a rear launch of the small boat. So whereas the 378 would lower the small boat over the side,
Oh, okay.
the boats go out the rear.
Sure. So better utility.
Yeah.
Or more useful. Huh. One thing I completely forgot about this early before we started recording. You were talking about the award, the Coast Guard award. You want to touch on that? That was pretty interesting. For the
Douglas Monroe Award.
that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a award that's given out every year. Usually there's a Coastie of the Year, Coast Guardsman of the Year is an award. And it usually goes to somebody that is involved in some type of rescue.
Okay.
Or some other community involvement that's exceptional. And then there is the Douglas Monroe Award for exceptional leadership.
Okay.
It's given out every year in honor of Douglas Monroe, who is the only Coastie that's ever been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Sure.
So that's what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. The one and only.
The one and only. Yep. So.
But well deserved.
Yep.
And that's usually I haven't seen it written down in a while, but it's specifically for like gallantry under fire or something, isn't it? The Congressional Medal of Honor. It involves. I think it involves combat. So for him to have received it,
well, it's exceptional.
Is good.
Yeah. The Congressional Medal of Honor is gallantry.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
I just obviously people joke about how the Coast Guard only has one, but because of the nature of what you do, to have obtained one is impressive. Because you're not even normally in those kind of situations.
Well, we have been in every major conflict, with since the United States was formed. I mean, since the Civil War. I mean, the Coast Guard was founded in 1790.
Oh, okay.
1790. So it's the oldest continuous seagoing service.
Hmm.
Because the Navy formed, and then it dispersed, and then it reformed.
Oh, sure. Okay. Huh, interesting.
Yeah. So the Coast Guard has been involved in every conflict from the Civil War till now.
Mm-hmm.
Every war that the United States has been involved in, obviously, not modern day Ukraine, but
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure, the whole, aspect of the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I know for Douglas Monroe, it was the Marine Commandant at that time that really pushed for his recognition, and he was dead.
Oh,
so
sure.
He died
Sure.
in that battle, Guadalcanal,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get all those Marines off the beach.
Sure.
And he did. But the, has there been other probably coasties that have shown, exceptional leadership
Sure.
in battle, probably, whether
Yeah.
or not they were recognized, obviously, that, there's only one that's got the Congressional Medal of Honor. So
Yeah. Like a lot of awards, it's not so much what you did, it's who saw it and is willing to make an effort to get the award for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
To a certain extent.
Yeah. For those, especially those, Congressional Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross and those type of awards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those have to be.
Yeah.
Pushed for.
Yeah. Which, given the nature of them, is fitting.
Yep.
It's not just
Yep.
a good cookie award or something
Yep.
like that. It's
No.
Well, cool. Any final thoughts or anything to?
No, it's like I said, it was good. almost 22 years, and it was my privilege, and I was blessed in many ways to be a part of the Coast Guard. So it was good. Not a whole lot of suck that I had to endure. The only suck that I would have endured was the deployments and leaving my family and my wife.
Sure.
Which that was the hardest. That was the hardest part, but it was always sweet when you got to come back to home port and there they are standing on the pier. It's,
Right.
It's one of those things that if you haven't experienced it, you can't really understand it.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's it's great.
Yeah, you don't know what you got till
It's gone.
till-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I started and I was like,
absent-
that doesn't fit exactly.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
That's the
That's
one.
probably what you were looking for.
That's the one.
Which is absolutely true.
A different song.
Yeah, I would get underway and we'd leave the pull away from port, pull away from the pier, and you just see them fading as they're standing there waving. You're like, oh man, 89 more days. if we don't get extended, which that was always the mentality that I used to tell young people when I had people working for me was expect the worst, hope for the best.
Sure. Yeah.
Expect that you're going to get extended, but hope that you're going to return a day early.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of how that's how I made it through.
Mm-hmm.
It's just expect the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah.
And so it was good, but yeah, the deployments were were the hard part.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How I Embraced the Suck. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend. And as my Girl Scout den mother used to say, stay frosty.
And we'll see if people listen and go, wasn't a whole lot of suck to that. No, that is true.